I love that sound after a long day at work. Hi everyone, my name is Tyson and welcome to a new show called Retro Hellspawn Reviews Tech. What do I do on this show? Well, unlike my normal review show, I review technology. It's like the name says. If you're wondering why I've been gone so long, I'll make a video to explain that soon. Anyway, today I'll be playing with the Steam controller. If you want my opinion right off the bat, my thoughts are that this thing is awesome, but please listen as there's a lot to know about the Steam controller before you should make the decision to purchase it. Also, you're going to want to do more research outside of this video. There are links to supplementary videos that I learned from in the description if you want to get more bang for your buck. Wait, before I continue with the episode, I just have to say, gloss, while it is normally terrible because fingerprints, it wasn't the worst choice in the world for the small portion of the controller that is covered with it, but they probably should have been smart and gone all matte to avoid the problem altogether given their target demographic. One more thing, I apologize to those who are anticipating this review however little there are at this young point of my YouTube career. I've had to rewrite this review 3 times because it's changed so much during the writing process, and I can't in good conscience release a video with false information that I know I can correct. Anyway, enough said, let's start with the good. This controller has a very unique style, unlike any other controller out there. Yes, the face buttons are ripped off of an Xbox controller and painted black, but name one other controller with dual trackpads, rear grip buttons, gyro controls, and has a customizable jingle for both turning the controller on or off, all for under $100. I got mine for just over $40, and I'd say it's more than worth that. Another positive about this controller is its customizable options, and just how vast they are really. You can customize the trackpads to be anything ranging from analog sticks to mouse-like analog sticks to a trackball mouse to face buttons, and the list kinda just goes on. The same goes with the face buttons, the analog stick, the triggers, bumpers, and grips. Another layer of the customization is the haptic feedback. If you aren't familiar with that concept, it's essentially area-specific vibrating feedback that, in my opinion, when it is used properly, enhances the experience of games, as well as also helping me have a better idea of where I am not only on the pad, but also where I'm looking or moving in the game. I'm finding, however, that not everyone exactly likes the haptic feedback, so use that thought at your own discretion and make the decision for yourself. One tip, if you have a game with the analog set to WASD keys, turn haptic feedback up to medium for it to feel like you're playing with a joystick with micro switches. We'll also let you know exactly which direction you're going. Also, if you're playing a game with a hold to walk button, you can set the outer ring bind button to that key and invert the outer ring so you get a sort of pseudo-analog. Unfortunately, as Woodsie stated in his video about mapping Fallout 4, the amount of compatibility and minimizing of workarounds is reliant upon developers. He stated in his video that Fallout 4 unfortunately doesn't support simultaneous input from keyboard, mouse, and gamepad all at once, which prevents simplistically mapping all of the buttons to standard gamepad buttons, with the exception of making the right pad a mouse trackball as well as gyro controls, maybe some grip rebinds or mode shifts, whatever. Look, the least we're asking, if you're not going to directly support the controller, is to allow for us to use it just by allowing multiple inputs. This can also be said about Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. It's really a shame. This is otherwise a flawless PC port in my eyes with great optimization, and it's my favorite game of 2015 without a shadow of a doubt. Just look at how many hours I put into it. Subtract about 20 for unintentionally leaving the game on while doing other things, but nonetheless, with how far I got in the game, you can tell I had a ton of fun while just playing the game as a sandbox and not really gaining any ground percentage-wise. That, and I got stuck after Chapter 2 started up with the rehashed missions via the extreme or total stealth variants, and that was incredibly fatiguing. Despite how fatiguing the game was, I'm really happy with the time I've put into it, and I plan to revisit it in the future and replay the missions. I actually just finished the campaign, so I'll be making a few videos about the Phantom Pain and Ground Zeroes in the future, so stay tuned for that if Metal Gear is your thing. Another problem that this controller has is that due to the complexity and depth of the customization, it's not as accessible. Fortunately, there are more often than not community or dev configs, but for one thing, I almost always need to edit them to my comfort level, but for another, there are plenty of games I've opened where the options are barren, especially for non-Steam games like Brutal Doom running on GZ Doom or Xandronum. To be fair though, I don't think that Valve developed this controller with the average Joe in mind, but rather designed it more for the current consumer base, which is more commonly those who like to tinker, as that mindset tends to flock to PC. Because of this could be looked at as a positive, which I do for the most part, but lack of accessibility is still a problem, and I felt the need to mention that. It is fairly accessible to those who like to tinker, but it should probably come with a booklet or even in-depth tutorials in big picture mode to explain what you can do with the controller to the average Joe who may not understand straight out of the box without an explanation. Similar to Woodsie's sentiment, I feel like the controller has dramatically improved since launch, and today is a better day than ever to pick up the Steam controller. But despite that, let's talk about the bugs the controller still has to this day. The controls will on occasion just decide to quit mid-game, some games just plain don't work with the controller, and sometimes controls in certain games will stick. By that I mean you'll be moving for a bit, and then all of a sudden when you let go of the stick to stop moving, the controller still thinks you're holding the stick in the same direction. If the stick is set to the gamepad stick, it'll just stay bugged until you quit the game. But if you have it bound to WASD, if you spin the stick in a circle a few times, it may stop bugging. This is highly irritating. Fortunately, it doesn't come up nearly as often as the other problems I mentioned. Back on the topic of losing controls, if you're playing a non-Steam game, for instance Brutal Doom running on GZ Doom, and the controller disconnects, you will need to restart the application to reset the config as it automatically reverts to desktop configs when the controller disconnects. This should seriously be addressed. This is highly annoying to have to do every time, especially for bigger games like GTA 5, which take a good few minutes to load everything. I bought the game via the physical release, and because of my lack of foresight, I'm stuck dealing with this stupid shit. Please fix this, Valve. I can't tell you how often this happens, and it happens without fail under those two circumstances. Another major problem I have with the controller is the config saving system. It fucking sucks! Come on guys, this is elementary shit. You should be able to just overwrite your current config with an additional button grouped with Save New and Save New Local only, but make it the default choice, as when I'm working on a config, I hate having to either delete the old config and save it again, or having to select a config that I'm editing, save it only for the config not to save over the old one. For that matter, the saving system is incredibly bugged. I posted a video about this recently only discussing the desktop config I have and how it just plain doesn't fucking work. I can't tell you how many hours I've spent perfecting this config for it all to fall flat because A, my config won't save, and B, when it does, it won't allow me to switch action sets. I almost never have this problem with games, but desktop mode could use a lot of improvement. At least, that lasted for about 3 days in one of their betas at the time of writing that part. Now an issue I'm having more often is opening an application or game without opening one out of big picture mode before going into big picture mode, and that causing occasionally everything you try to open giving you a false error saying that Steam isn't open. Also, you should be able to edit your desktop config without entering big picture mode. I don't know, maybe it's just me. On the topic of desktop controller configurator, you should also be able to see and be able to interact with the export and import buttons. Why the hell aren't they there? I get you guys need a creative staff, but what's with creativity? Is it the talent, the finesse, or is it something different? I think it's the giant beetle who eats my socks before I get them out of the dryer. Fuck you, sock-eating beetle! Seriously though, what's with the lack of Q&A in the UI department? I don't know, maybe that's just me. Speaking of bugs, let me just give you a tip so you don't have to deal with a lot of headaches. If you decide to have mouse controls paired with gamepad controls, you're more than likely going to have a bad time. It takes a certain amount of support for multiple input methods for that to work without bugging the game out of control, so far as something it will Alt-Tab me out of the game when neither Alt nor Tab are bound to anything. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of games that support it well, but even then it may not be 100% properly working. For instance, Grand Theft Auto 5 allows for multiple inputs, but if you're driving and want to pull out your gun and start shooting and using the mouse for aiming with gamepad controls for everything else, you won't be able to keep the gun out. You'll repeatedly pull it out and sit back down. Fortunately, the current Steam beta has the ability to switch between action sets, and the latest update allows for an on-screen indicator and beep as options let you know which set you're on. So this isn't as much of a problem considering you can switch to a customized control set. That way you can have motion-assisted mouse aiming for on foot and motion-controlled for steering for driving. To go back to the beginning, I mentioned that most reviewers don't really do the gyro justice. There are a few people here on YouTube who are considerably reliable sources for information on technology, gaming, etc., but the Steam controller was not one of those things they were reliable for. The two that come to mind for me are Linus Tech Tips and Rich of Review Tech USA. Before I continue, Keep in mind that just because I think this doesn't mean that I think these people are bad YouTubers. In fact, I love their work. This is just an instance that I disagree with them, mostly for lack of doing their homework, which is uncommon for them. Here's my biggest problem, which Woodsie also expressed when discussing the YouTube community's predominant reviews that have the most views. I share his opinion on that relative to both Linus and Rich's videos covering the controller. It stops before they actually dig in. It's like they picked it up, tried it for about half an hour, and gave up because it's stupid. In Rich's case, he didn't even touch the thing and he blatantly calls it a worthless piece of shit whenever he brings it up. That I can't agree with at all. What the fuck, Rich? You're normally not that closed-minded. Why don't you just give it a try before judging it without any basis? Again, I love your work, I just can't understand your thought process in that decision. Anyway, let's discuss what I've been alluding to this whole time, the gyro. Everyone seems to ignore this feature save for a few people here on YouTube, and I'm sick of the straight up ignorance being displayed for the world to see. These motion controls are what the Wii's motion controls should have been. The haptic feedback gives you a perfect indication of where you are both in the game and on the controller, making this controller much more precise than an Xbox or PlayStation controller of any generation. The control customization makes this controller the most versatile I've ever seen. I'm not saying because of my opinion that all of a sudden this controller is made for everyone, as I don't believe that. It's not traditional, so immediately that'll turn people away. There's also a lot of bugs, and it requires more than an hour's worth of patience to get a basic feel for the controller. If you want another opinion on that subject, check out Woodsie's final review of the Steam controller. Link in the description. He has some different opinions that you may want to hear, as well as some additional info. It's worth checking out if you want to learn more. The gyro really saves this controller for me. Without the gyro, this controller is good for many things, but also lacks in many areas. It isn't good for FPS games because the touchpad isn't as good for aiming, driving games would have been controlled traditionally with a stick, or alternatively the left or right pad. A lot of games would be missing out on enhanced gameplay opportunities, the list goes on. The gyro makes FPS games and racing games not only more engaging, but also more accurate as well. Games such as Second Sight also get improvements with environmental physics manipulation by moving the controller to move the item that's floating. Same goes with playing the House of the Dead Overkill with gyro controls. Not to mention, setting up these configs, while it can be tedious at times, is also very rewarding when you finally finish your perfect configuration and you upload it to the cloud either for yourself or to the world to share. So this was rather unexpected. My girlfriend isn't a gamer by any stretch of the imagination, but I convinced her to sit down and play Portal, one of the best games to start using this controller with. To give some backstory, she hasn't played through either of the Portal games, only barely having touched them several years back, and primarily the only games she likes to play are MMOs, RPGs, life simulators like The Sims, and more casual games like Mario Party and Mario Kart. Despite this, she actually didn't do bad for her first time using the controller, and made her way through the first 12 chambers with relative ease. I couldn't convince her to use the gyro, but it takes time to learn the trackpad, it takes even more time to learn the gyro. This controller makes me giddy like a kid about video games again, because I'm experiencing a lot of games like never before. The motion control is actually really responsive, and I would argue enhances my ability in-game, or at least gives me the comfort of sitting back to play while not sacrificing too much ability to respond because of my method of input. This controller, however, is not for everyone with its high amount of bugs and steep learning curve, but I would highly recommend it to people who like to be there for new technology and not only know, but actually like the chinks in the chain that come with experimental technology. As I said before, links to supplementary videos about this controller in the description. Anyway guys, that's it. Let me know what you thought in the comment section down below if you choose so, or leave me a like or dislike and subscribe if you like to see more of my videos. I'll be making a lot more in the near future, so stay tuned for that. I'm also probably going to be making an in-depth guide on using the Steam controller with all of the info I've learned in the not too distant future. I hope this helps you come to your decision of if you want to invest in a product with surprising capabilities that I can't wait to see Valve expand. Anyway guys, this is Retro Hellspawn, signing off.